Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. And now, please welcome the Director, President, and CEO of the Wilson Center and Concordia Leadership Council member, the Honorable Jane Harman, and the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Madame Christine Lagarde.
Good morning. How many of you walked here this morning? So we're all ready for a wonderful panel. Chérie sœur. That means darling sister, to my left. I became head of the Wilson Center in 2011. I left Congress in my 9th term because it was an enormous honor to head a major think tank in Washington as the first woman director and CEO. And that year, Christine Lagarde, chérie sœur, came to Washington to head the IMF as the first woman director of the IMF. And she hosted a lunch in her offices for women of, I don't want to say a certain age, but a certain position. No.
With wisdom and experience.
Yeah, that's right. And I walked into that lunch, and she had me at hello. And there has developed a wonderful, magical, professional relationship, but even more important, a personal relationship. And we are friends because we're friends, but also because we can share stories about what it feels like both to win and to lose in these senior positions. And we've both been through that, and I want to ask Christine about that in a moment. It's hard to believe that in 2017, women continue to be underrepresented in leadership worldwide. We are half or more than half of the population, and yet, according to all the work done, we hold less than a quarter of the public service positions. We hear a lot about women at the top. One of them is to my left, but certainly women lead countries, sadly not this one, but Theresa May, Angela Merkel, Nicola Sturgeon, Michelle Bachelet, and others all over the world. But we don't hear enough about women in the middle and women coming up from behind and the way they see the world. So maybe we can talk about that a bit. The Wilson Center, which I now head, spends a lot of time studying this. And as Christine will appreciate, we are charting and analyzing data. This is something that does appeal to younger people about the women participating in public office around the world, how they got there, and what they are doing in the role. Can you believe that a global women's public leadership index does not exist? So we had to create one. And using over 100 indicators, the index will show us what's working and what's not. And it will help us identify exactly how to create better policies for closing the gender gap. And I would say for increasing the talent available in leadership positions. Our goal, I think it's rather modest, is to ensure that women hold 50% of significant leadership positions by 2050. How many think we would have a better world if that were true? Yeah. So, chérie sœur, one of the lessons I've learned, because I lost an election for governor in California, is about losing and why losing makes you stronger. Or that's my view. Let me start with that. You've lost a few things too. You've told this story, you did not get into the École Nationale d'Administration twice. What did that loss mean?
If you allow me, ma sœur, chérie, I would like to reciprocate the lunch story, because you mentioned one, but I want to mention another one, which I think epitomizes what women can achieve when they put their mind and their energy to it, and their sense of friendship. The second lunch we had together, if you remember, Jane, You organized it because you reciprocated. But you decided, and that was, remember the days of very great friendship between the Democrats and the Republicans? Well, you decided that day that you would invite across the aisle, the female Republican Congress woman, that's duplication of female women, but never mind, and the same on the Democrat side.
Right.
And that was very unusual because they were simply in those days not talking to each other as if things had changed. But they all came at your invitation, and we had an amazing lunch during which we exchanged views, we discussed policies, we had ideas, and there was an amazing, not consensus, because people have different views and different background, and they follow the lines and all the rest of it. But there was a very civilized exchange that you actually created, and that only, I think, women can achieve in those circumstances. So that's just a little stone on that path to improving the relationship between people and supporting a dialogue which we so badly need. So, back to your question, now that I've had my lunch story as well. I did fail quite miserably, actually, especially the first time, because I did try hard and did fail, entering the École Nationale d'Administration, which is a mixture of Harvard Business School, West Point, MIT, sort of you put all that together and that turns into that French school, which produces the civil service elite. And I very much wanted to join that school, which I didn't. Now, from that, I learned that you have to, collect yourself, don't feel totally miserable, try to analyze and understand why you failed and what was missing in your path to success and actually led you to failure. And if what was missing, you will never manage to have it or to learn it, then turn to another direction. Look at something else, find other opportunities, and just turn the page and focus differently. Now, I didn't quite do that, to be honest. I tried, but I was still tempted and I wanted to do it again. So I did prepare much better second time around, and be it as it may, the day when I was supposed to actually register and file all my documentation to actually take the exam, I missed it. And I think it's one of those Freudian lapses that actually sent me to another direction at that point in time. So I did that, collect my thoughts, considered the options, and moved into a different direction. The blessing for me was when the head of that school, some 20 years later, asked me to come and give a speech and a presentation about the judiciarization of political life. And he introduced me by saying, "I'm so pleased that you failed, because had you succeeded, you would never be where you are today."
Exactly.
So that's just, I think, something that we can all learn from. You fail, you get back to your feet, you collect it all together, refocus on all the great things that you can actually do, just in another direction.
And it's worth focusing on that, because so many young women select out because they're afraid they'll fail.
Yeah.
And I failed, you failed, and look, it works out. You become stronger. You won't believe me today, but think about it.
Yeah. You know what? I just came back from Asia, and I just want to mention one thing. There's such, in some of the countries that I visited lately, there's such a sense of competition and being totally driven, focused, and 100% and more on the objective of succeeding, that when young people, particularly young girls, don't succeed, they look at terrible alternatives. And I think that, we, a bit more senior, having failed a couple of times or more, we have a duty to communicate that it's okay and it's not a disaster, and there are other paths to take that will lead us somewhere.
And often a better place.
Yeah.
Life is a journey, and you can't really script it, but you can try to find your passion and pick yourself up, get your hair done, and smile and move on. So, I mentioned this Global Public Leadership Index, and we are trying to pinpoint with data how women can find their way and succeed. There wasn't an index when you and I started on our paths. Do you think this will make a difference?
Yes, absolutely. I'm totally convinced that measuring is key, and the difficulty we have in measuring ourselves is actually disaggregating data by gender. And when we look at financial access, for instance, for women, it's really hard because central banks in many countries of the world will not actually disaggregate data and provide information, numbers and data on a per gender basis. And the same is true in many, many areas, not just access to finance. So trying to disaggregate and go deep into what is gender related is extremely important. Yeah.
We also think it's important to provide female role models. Mm-hmm. You are one. How important do you think that is?
I think it's best to ask those who look at me as a role model, and I feel very honored, very privileged, and sometimes strongly encouraged not to give up because of them. I had role models myself in the course of my life, and they mattered to me enormously, and the way in which I could just look up at them and say, I can be like her, I can do it. If I work hard, if I follow the right track, and if I'm determined. So having a role model is, of course, important.
The truth was, though, years back, there weren't that many females to look up to, or maybe
True.
That wasn't your experience. My experience was that Geraldine Ferraro, who many of you knew or have heard of, who was the first woman nominated for a vice presidential slot by a major party, became my dear friend. And I wanted to be her, and I took steps to get into politics to try to be something like her. She died about 8 years ago or so after a very long fight with cancer, but she absolutely never quit, and she reinvented herself many times, and it was hugely important to me to follow her. What role models did you have?
I think the first one I had was my mother. Mm-hmm. As much as I found her annoying.
How many of you think your mothers are annoying, or were? Okay.
But, you know, in retrospect, she was just an amazing character who inspired me and guided me. You know, widow at the age of 39, having to raise 4 children and doing everything at the same time and more, being a fantastic professor of Latin and ancient Greek, sewing beautiful dresses at night to look fine in the morning, and minding all of us. I think she was just amazing in that respect. And then there was Simone Weil. Simone Weil was, she went through the Holocaust, was in concentration camp, managed to come back, lost most of her family in the process, and rose from that to become magistrate, then Minister of Justice in France, a political leader, the first female president of the European Parliament, and a woman of principles and ethics and inspiration for many of us French young women at the time.
Yeah. So you're the first woman to lead the IMF. Mm-hmm. And I know, because we've had long conversations about how you have opened up leadership roles to people from all over the world. One of the arguments or criticisms of the IMF is that leadership at the top has not been opened to people beyond the West. How do you rate your own leadership, and what do you think should happen in the future at the IMF to answer the criticism that some make?
Well, maybe 2 things, Jane. One is, I dare think that I was a little bit selected, not so much because I was a European, but because maybe I had the competence to do the job. At least that's probably why they re-elected me. But I certainly hope that going forward, this institution, as well as the World Bank, will select their leaders on the basis of merits, talent, track record, background, more than belonging to a particular region or being from an advanced economy, which has been the case ever since the Second World War, when the institutions were set up. But second thing that I want to say is that what I've tried to do is to also open the horizon of our many, many talented economists and ask them to work beyond "it's mostly fiscal," which used to be the motto for IMF, "it's mostly fiscal." And I've encouraged them to look at what's macro-critical, including female labor force participation, women's contribution to the economy, inequality, climate change, and corruption. Those are the 4 areas where we had sort of touched it a little bit on the side, where it's becoming very much central piece of the work that we do, and in the most practical way as well. So that's, I think, an important... I hope to have created a degree of legacy and sustainability in this work so that we will continue doing it.
Well, many times when I call you for dinner at the last minute, you're headed to Africa or you're in Africa. You've made I don't know how many trips, but at the Wilson Center we have a program that focuses, that's supported by a firm called Brown Capital Management, that focuses on development in Africa. And I know that the IMF has participated in a number of programs there, like the Compact with Africa. What part of the economic puzzle there do women represent? And what specifically have you done or are you doing to help women in Africa, to empower women in Africa?
Well, first of all, Africa is many, many, many different countries, over 50. We have programs in 19 of those countries, and we have, I think, 6 technical training centers in various places in Africa. Many different realities. Some countries that are resource-rich, that are exporting a lot and that have relied extensively on their natural resources, which have taken a hit during the years of the crisis. You have countries that are essentially importers, which have surprisingly fared a lot better. You have countries that consider women as a real pool of talent. I think of Rwanda, for instance, where 30%, there's a quota that any institutions, any parliament must have at least 30% women. And guess what? There are now more than 60% women in parliament.
Yeah. Highest number in the world.
Absolutely. But in the main, I would say that where it's lagging, it's in relation to education, access to secondary education in particular. It's investment in infrastructure, because when the right infrastructure is developed, then it alleviates the burden on women, because it's usually the women who go and fetch the water, fetch the wood, and actually look after the, putting food on the table and making sure that the family is fed. So a lot needs to be done, but it has to be on a per country basis, on a per culture basis, because there's a lot of substracts that add layers to a particular country to form an environment where either women will strive or women will suffer. But there is huge strength in the African woman, and wherever I go and I try to visit at least 4 African countries per year, 4 or 5. I see groups of entrepreneurs, of women entrepreneurs, of women students, young girls, and there is unbelievable strength, energy, and desire to take the country up and their country up and further. So many of them need support, need help, but there is quite a lot of wealth.
And there's also some real success by women leading some of these countries. Take Ellen Johnson Sirleaf,
yes,
as an example.
Yeah, that's true.
And Joyce Banda, who was a scholar at the Wilson Center for the last year or so, and was focused, by the way, on how it's not just helping young women and women succeed, but you have to reach them at a much younger age.
Yeah.
At the sort of age 10 forward to instill
and what you say is so right, because it also has an impact on fertility, and that's really an issue that some of the countries have to address. There are countries, particularly in West African countries, like Niger, like Mali, where the fertility rate is north of 6 per woman. If you consider that, relative to middle-income countries that are closer to 2.5, 3, there is a long way to go, and that's where women hold the key to development and to addressing the demographic issue that can be a curse more than a blessing if it's not handled properly.
Well, from what we study, Africa has 54 countries. Most people don't know that. Many of them are success stories, and I hope you would agree, that the real success of Africa going forward will be charted by the women of Africa. They're strong, they're vibrant, many of them are fearless in taking on old cultures, and I just could not be more impressed. And obviously you go there on a regular basis to get out of having dinner with me, which hurts my feelings, but I'm surviving. I mentioned the word confidence because I think it's another part of the women's leadership story. It certainly was part of my own story. How did you get the confidence, not only to face up to losing and move on, but to put yourself out there in very visible roles where, guess what, dirty little secret, people are jealous, they're political rivals, and they try to tear you down?
Confidence is key. We women generally are short on confidence. We lack it. We over-prepare. We work a lot harder than men in the same position. You were a lawyer and a partner in the law firm, so was I. I was working twice as hard as boys in the same circumstances and with the same files and with the same clients. And it is still true today. So this is an area where we need to do more work and we need to improve. I think confidence, certainly in my case, was built by love. I think when you receive love, when you have, that to help you grow and mature, nourishes the confidence that you need. Then I had a few brothers as well, and I had so many fights with them that I think eventually it built my confidence as well.
Who won those fights?
I did until my brothers. I did until my brothers took judo lessons, and then I was lost.
Does anyone believe this? She's a synchronized swimmer who swims every morning, and she's an awesome athlete, and I don't believe that for a minute. But you mentioned love, and I know, because these are part of our conversations too, we talk about children and family. Both of us look at our iPhones all the time, just scrolling through pictures of grandchildren. This is a common trait anyway. And talk about that.
You'll get there too, believe me.
Well, isn't there anybody out there who's close to, yeah, I hope so. All the grandparents, raise your hands. Okay. See, it's not hopeless. Okay. You're right. But Christine, it's not just work-life balance. It's letting life into your work. Talk about that, how you do that, because you do it brilliantly. I see you do it.
I'm sometimes afraid that I let work into my life rather than the other way around. My first recruiting interview, the first interview that I took, which was successful eventually, was with a woman who was the managing partner of Baker McKenzie in Paris. And what stayed with me and actually decided me to go to Baker McKenzie and not to those other firms.
Where she became managing partner of the entire firm.
Yeah. But that office was led by a woman, and throughout the interview she asked all the right questions and and I was trying to behave as much as I could. And at one point in time the phone rang, and that woman, who was strong, well rehearsed, beautifully dressed, very businesslike in those days, and impressed me enormously, she suddenly changed. And I heard her say, "Have you done your homework tonight? Things okay? Is Paul there?" And yeah, of course I'm coming for dinner. And I thought, wow, that's a lesson for you. Because as hard as you work, as much as you need to demonstrate and show and prove to yourself and to others, there's a part of your life that has to be just there, available and accessible to others. So yes, I did have a tough business life and professional life, but there was no day, I think, in those 20 years as a lawyer and as a partner and then as chairman of the firm, where I did not talk to my children at least twice a day. For 6 years I was living in Chicago, they were in Paris, I was traveling back and forth all the time, but there was no day without talking to them and being available. even in meetings.
You know, as I look at you and I think about why I love you so much, I think your humanness, not just your humanity, but your humanness and your vulnerability is part of making you as effective as you are. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, well, we probably don't know. But you know, when I see you in the dark, you are us. We are you, and there is a humanity in each and every one of us that is very precious, and that we need to reach out and that we need to cherish, not just within ourselves, but with other people. And I think that's what makes my mission at the IMF so fantastic.
And that is what helps you connect to so many people inside your organization and beyond your organization. And for those who miss it, I always look. But Christine is slightly taller than I am. Maybe you noticed. But at the G20 meeting in Italy recently, all these leaders of countries are lining up. And there's Christine in the back in her pearls. And it made me so proud. I emailed you immediately. Our time is up, but I just want to say that if we're talking about glass ceilings, first of all, she will break it sooner because she's taller. But second of all, this is what a woman leader is. And I'm just absolutely delighted to share the stage with you, Cherie, sir.
Thank you.